Okay, everyone, I'm super excited to introduce today Laura Hayes. She's going to be presenting on the one AAC strategy you may be missing. So take it away, Laura.
Hey guys, good morning. As we talked about, I've got my coffee here. I hope you do too. I hope it's going to be a great day two for AAC in the cloud. As you mentioned, my name is Laura Hayes and I am an AAC specialist. And today we are going to dive into a topic that I am so passionate about because it's one that hits close to home. It's one that I have looked in and out of my entire life. And it's one that I think that we often kind of overlook when we talk about strategies for AAC. So let's dive in. The very first thing we're going to talk about is the problem that we see most often with AAC use. And it goes back to this quote. I know many of you have heard this quote, and that is just that having the device itself doesn't make you an effective communicator any more than having a piano makes you a musician. Such a great quote from Bugelman. When we think about this problem, let's talk about some statistics. Approximately 97 million people in the world have complex communication needs and can benefit from AAC. That comes most recent this year from Smith and Pidani. In the US, when we think about supporting someone who's communicating, there was a survey done of special educators across all 50 states, and they reported that 18.2% of their students use some form of AAC. 6.9% use gestures, 6.5% use visual supports, and at least 4.8% use a speech generating device. Fewer than 40% of participants continue to use their AAC device after 12 months of implementation. So we see that communication breakdown. We see that communication abandonment. We know that there are reasons why. There's a great piece of information coming out of Scope that says up to 75% of the abandon rate of AAC devices are when students transition from further education into adult services. So a huge drop off. So what are we missing? When we think about device abandonment, what are we missing? Many of you may be familiar with the participation model from Bugelman and Miranda. If you aren't, I've linked it in the slide deck. Please go look at it. Oh, I should jump back to when I forgot to mention that I have a QR code for the slides, for the PDF of the slides on my website. I also put that in the Slack channel, so you guys should have a link, but if not, you can always email me at the end of this presentation and I will send you that link as well. But when we look at reasons for device abandonment, we know that a lot of them come from that participation model. Breakdowns in language organization and how their access needs might shift or change and what those look like for successful device use. That's an AAC user barrier. But then we have all these other barriers that we look at that are related to the environment and the communication partners, like their ability to use the device. It's not flexing and shifting with the needs of the AAC user or the environment when they shift classrooms, when they shift to a new therapist, et cetera, et cetera. The system itself is not reliable, mainly in the sense that other communication forms are more efficient or more accurate or more easily understood. And so that capacity isn't built for symbolic language on the device. There's not enough tech support or customer support for devices so that when they break down or when the technology moves, it doesn't move with the AAC user flexibly. There's a lack of representation on their device. They don't feel like it's an authentic piece of their own voice. And that is even described in some research. Judge and Townend in 2013 talked about this because AAC users themselves were surveyed and they described the tool or the device not as an extension tool of their own authentic voice, but as a minority communication tool, which I think is so interesting. I think that's shifted a little bit since iPad and mainstream technology is starting to catch up, but it's a really important caveat to note when we talk about device abandonment. If they don't see it as their voice, they're not going to use it as a primary mode of communication. And that's so critical when we talk about this strategy that we're going to talk about in a bit. The family, the communication partners don't have the buy-in or see themselves represented in the system. There's not enough follow-up, again, for that successful implementation use. And then the big one, which is just those attitude barriers, right? Their lack of emotional readiness to use an AAC system as another form of communication, or just the overall lack of education or systematic barriers that we might see in administration. So there's so many reasons to device abandonment. Solutions that we know from evidence that can help us. Aided language input and modeling. There's some great presentations if you're not sure what that is. If you're new to AAC, there's some great presentations yesterday and today on that, as well as in previous AAC in the cloud years past that you can go back to those archive presentations. Communication partner training. I know there's some great presentations on that that have been done and are getting done today. AAC feature matching. So what features do we need in a system, right? Natural and targeted feedback, active feedback, giving them feedback on the device, giving them adequate wait time, using child-led therapy strategies, and verbal referencing.
Hey, Laura, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We still just see your tech page. We're just seeing slide one. There we go. Now we're good to go.
Okay,
I'm
thank
so
you.
sorry about that.
No, so you guys, this is my first time presenting in Canva. So I said to jump back on if there was a glitch, which clearly there is. So thank you for that. All right, so we're caught up, I hope. But is there something missing? Something that I see that kind of is a casual throwaway when we talk about effective practice-based strategies to helping AAC users move forward and reduce that device abandonment is communication acknowledgement. If it's mentioned, it's usually a throwaway. Like, yeah, we want to acknowledge what they say. We want to acknowledge all forms of communication. But are we really diving in to the back end of what communication acknowledgement can give us for our AAC users? So the rest of today's presentation, we are going to talk about the value of communication acknowledgement. We're going to talk about how we can and how we should use this strategy. And then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about where we can go from here. Okay, I want to preface this with, when we do the background of the importance of communication acknowledgement, you are going to see some, in my biased opinion, really cute videos of my kids, my daughter specifically, that I took in anticipation of this presentation and talking about the value and importance. The reason that I took my daughter is twofold. One, I wanted you to see what this looks like in natural language development without any other pieces of equipment. But the other reason is that I didn't want to use barriers and breakdowns with AAC and AAC users as a form to kind of show you, because I think we're fighting enough of that. And I will highlight some of the great strategies that we can do with AAC users in a little bit. But that's why you see my daughter is not an AAC user, but I want to highlight some of this natural language development and what it can look like for acknowledgement with her so that we can talk about it and dive in further. So we're going to watch this quick video and some questions I want you to ask yourself. How is she exploring language? What happens to the exchange before I acknowledge her communication? And then watch what happens after.
No. Water. Apple juice.
Yes, orange juice.
Orange juice.
Orange juice.
Orange juice.
Orange juice.
That's right. Orange juice.
That's right, orange juice.
Frog fries. That's fine. No.
Okay. So other than having a delicious meal and seeing her cutie patootie face, the things that I'm hoping, and you can throw these into the Slack if you guys want to kind of talk through it, but what I'm hoping you're seeing is how much more dynamic the communication exchange gets once she gets that acknowledgement. It also allows her to move on both semantically and syntactically in the exchange, meaning that she was like, "Ew, apple juice, apple juice, apple juice, juice, apple juice." And then as soon as I said orange juice, orange juice, orange juice, we were able to move on. She was like, "Yeah, that's right." Because, she's type A like her mama. "That's right, orange juice." But then we got to move on to French fries. Then we got to move on to something a little bit different. So when we look at communication acknowledgement, it is so much more than just giving them that affirmation. It allows us to move forward. And I want you to kind of remember that as we kind of move through the rest of this presentation. In 1978, Tronick and Edward Tronick, he did a procedure where this experiment called the still face experiment. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it is an experiment where a mother faces her baby and is asked to hold a still face, so just flat. So she is not going to react to the baby's behavior. Up until that point, she's given normal interactions. The reactions of the baby are then observed. What they found in this experiment was that in general, very, very quickly, the baby will become agitated by the failed attempts to evoke a reaction in the mother. Continued attempts to connect that are ignored, you will start to see signs of distress and frustration, including crying, screeching, and like even losing postural control and just overall extremity mobility. Their central nervous system becomes so overwhelmed that they physically just cannot take it and start to collapse. They will even start to respond, and in some cases, bite or self-injurious behaviors are seen. A lot of emotional distress. And then towards the end, and this is over a very short amount of time, the baby then becomes withdrawn and no longer attempts to get the mother's attention. Very, very important. They reduplicated this experiment with toddlers and with fathers, and they saw the exact same response and behavior patterns. This is so important when we think about communication acknowledgement, because our responses and our acknowledgement and our interactions matter. And when we think about moving forward with AAC use and with our AAC users, having that acknowledgement or lack thereof is critical in how they can move forward or not move forward. So these are just two quotes that I really, really like. They're from Caitlin Kelps on a recent podcast interview that I had her on. And I think they are very applicable to this conversation. The first is that it is easy in the chaos of a day to ignore an AAC system. And that includes interactions and responses for AAC users themselves, right? Whether it be that they're stimming on a device, whether it be that it's not appropriate to what we're talking about, they're just exploring, or I've got 20 other kids in my classroom, or I've got 3 other kids at the dinner table. Not having that acknowledgement can matter. The other thing is that I really like this quote because it says, we start to steer away from honoring communication for some reason. Once a kid gets pretty proficient, we start to focus really hard on the language and the sentence building and stop honoring single word and 2-word utterances. And then we can start to see device abandonment happen. I think that's really relevant too, right? Because we think about acknowledgement being this emerging language communication tool or strategy, but it's always important. And we're going to talk about why. It's always important for us to feel acknowledged. It goes beyond just affirming what someone says language-wise. It goes into the heart of their social emotional state. And again, whether they're able to move forward and feel that sense of authentic voice, or whether or not we're stuck and we start to feel those feelings of frustration and eventually withdrawnness and lack of support. When we value and we use communication acknowledgement, it can increase feelings of equality, free choice and freedom, authenticity of voice, dialogue and pragmatic variety, like you saw with my daughter's example, language reflection and extension of thought. Again, that was highlighted in that video, and reciprocity and intrinsic motivation. Wouldn't we like this for all of our AAC users? This is the heart of it, you guys. This is what it means.
Dad.
Okay, so we're going to watch another video. And what I want you to see is just the difference between minimal acknowledgement and when acknowledgement is given. These are two short clips, same activity, and it's very intentional. One, I am giving very little. I'm still giving expressions. She still knows I'm there. One, I'm giving very little acknowledgement. I'm really trying hard not to use other strategies here too. So you can just see the difference of just the strategy of acknowledgement. So here's the first one with minimal acknowledgement.
Can we give it to you?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Okay, even at the end, I couldn't not acknowledge her. And so you saw the shift, right? But up until that point, it was very kind of inward, very one note, kind of just on her own, didn't really move forward. So let's watch the shift.
That.
That.
Up.
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 Boom.
Boom.
Boom. One year.
For me?
Okay, again, the main points here are that this is way more interactive, right? Did you guys notice anything? Let's throw it in the Slack. Like, what are your guys' observations from this? Are you guys seeing that in the first video, it's very inward, it doesn't move forward. And just by giving the strategy of, I'm just acknowledging like up, up, up. Okay, now it's gonna crash down. Now, instead of playing by myself, I am exchanging it. Clear increase in language. Yeah, Zoe. And then again, we're going back and forth, responding way more. Yes, Mina, yes. Her weight to include me. Yes, all of those things. This was a 30-second clip. This is not something that I am adding a lot of other language supports. Like, think of how much more dynamic it would be if we were adding all of those things in. But it's, to me, very obvious that one is very inward and one is way more expansive and way more socially interactive. Oh, Diane, I really like that observation. She seemed a bit stressed in vocal inflection in the first, but very happy in the second, right? By nature, we are social creatures. And so having that acknowledgement and interaction is huge, not just for play, but for all of our communication. Yeah. Well, what happens if communication is not acknowledged? This is the stuff that we see a lot, right? I know you guys see this on a regular basis. And this is the thing too that I see from parents, like so exhausted and so frustrated when their kids can't communicate. When communication messages are missed, research tells us that there's feelings of dissatisfaction, increased stress, both for the person themselves and for their communication partner, feelings of unappreciation, decreased value, disconnect with others, depression and abandonment, loss of energy without return, decreased worth and significance, resentment, frustration, and loss of authentic voice and representation. This is huge. These are all related to the psychology and the intrinsic value that we feel. These don't even represent the medical, basic, and daily needs that get missed along with what we're talking about, right? Likely, these are going to increase that correlation to learned helplessness that we sometimes see for individuals that we work with. This is why this conversation is so heavy. This is why communication acknowledgement is so, so important. Because if we miss it, all of these things are
Why are
at
you
risk for
sad?
happening. Sorry, these keep jumping to play right away. I want you to watch this video, this very short video. We were outside and I was very intentional about not acknowledging her communication. I knew what she was telling me, and I intentionally not only didn't acknowledge it, but I acknowledged it inappropriately, meaning I said something different than what she was trying to communicate. So the first video is a little bit of that exchange, and then the second video is the consequences or the repercussions of this short missed acknowledgement.
What are you telling Gunner?
Gunner. Go, boy. Coffee. Go away.
Across the house? Across the neighborhood?
No. He's a
He's a cat?
no.
What are you trying to tell Mommy? Come back, please.
Okay, so that was the tail end of it, but that was after about 2 to 3 minutes of missed acknowledgement. Here's what happened after.
Why?
I want to walk.
You don't want to walk now?
No.
Because Mommy didn't understand?
No.
What if we walk together? You want to help me hold Gunner?
Yeah.
Yeah. You gonna help him cross the sidewalk?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, this is why I didn't want to use AAC users themselves, because this is how quickly it can shift in a moment where we are not able to acknowledge someone's communication. Everything else in that day was fine. She is too, they have their meltdowns, they have their moments, and you'll see that in a second. But the difference, it was almost exactly like that still face experiment that I described, where she tried, she continued, she persisted, and then she withdrew and she walked away. She physically moved away. Without that piece of acknowledgement, that communication breakdown occurred. I was able to remedy it, and you saw her come back to me. But what about our AAC users when we aren't able to acknowledge, when we miss those moments? And over time, how quickly does that fuse shorten? And when we think about how much we're talking about, well, they're not engaged. Well, why aren't they engaged? AAC or communication acknowledgement in general, whether it be with a device or whether it be through any form of communication modality, is so critical in being able to understand who someone is and what their authentic voice is trying to tell us. So this was 2 to 3 minutes. Think about this over 2 to 3 months, 2 to 3 years, an entire lifetime. There is abandonment and social emotional impact that we can see. When I think about this, why it's so important to me is this picture right here on the left is my sister, Jessica. She has complex communication needs. She's had them her entire life. I love her dearly. It is the reason that I became a speech language pathologist. It's kind of the heart of, I kind of always said that I was born to be this, because I was the person that acknowledged her. I understood her speech patterns. I helped her. And when I watch her to this day and how she communicates with people, whether they be her family members or whether they be maybe someone that she's working with in the community or her independent service living home, she will persist until she is acknowledged. She will search for that acknowledgement. And so she will tell you all about her boyfriend, Mark, or she will tell you all about the drawing that she made for you. If you do not acknowledge that and repeat it back to her to show her that you understand, she keeps going, or eventually she withdraws and abandons. And you can tell who connects with her based off of just that basic acknowledgement, and who misses the boat, and who she's like, I don't have time for you. Again, it impacts her social emotional state, and it impacts her communication connections with other people and her communication partners. The other thing that I think this is really relevant to is just a lot of these experiences that we have talked about in the hot topic of Gestalt language processing, because so many of we're going to talk about who is at risk for this the most clinically. And in my personal experience, Gestalt language processors are the ones who I feel like many of us have sat back and said, why are they not moving forward? What is the reason? Well, for so long, there's been this idea of stop the scripting, do not support that, do not extinguish it as much as possible, do not acknowledge scripts, refocus them to words and all of these analytic language strategies that we've known to be effective. And now learning and watching and shifting how we approach that therapeutically. Lily, yesterday, if you haven't watched her presentation, please go back and watch it. It was amazing. And I highly recommend it because it talks all about how we can really lean in and not extinguish scripting, really how we can support that and move forward. And that all goes back to communication acknowledgement. It is acknowledging how they communicate, how they neurologically process language. And so that if we haven't been acknowledging that, that is so critical to helping them move forward. The definition of acknowledgement is the recognition of the importance or quality of something when you identify and recognize the importance or quality of someone's efforts. That person subsequently feels seen, heard, and understood. And maybe on a personal level, like think about someone where you didn't feel like they understood you, right? You're like, I feel like I'm communicating to you, right? Whether that be a coworker or a husband or a child, you're like, I think I'm speaking the same language as you, and you're not hearing me. If you're not acknowledged, if you're not understood, what impact does that make with you? Okay. So this video, when I was kind of thinking about this presentation, sometimes when I talk about communication acknowledgement and the importance of it, I think people get wrapped up in, okay, well, everything's going great. And then what happens if there's a communication breakdown? Acknowledgement is so important that it can impact when there is a communication barrier or a breakdown. If you can figure out the ability to acknowledge what that message is, and it doesn't have to necessarily be something that's really robust, right? But if you can figure out the heart of that communication and acknowledge it, you can see a shift. So this example is she really wants to go outside and ride her bike. Watch what happens when I acknowledge.
You need it open.
Yeah.
Mommy hears that you want it open. I know, it's hard. We can't go outside right now. But I know you need it open to go outside. I hear you.
Even in difficult situations, and maybe most especially in difficult situations, that strategy of acknowledgement of thought and message can help repair the social emotional impact for anyone that we support. When we look at AAC users, some that might be at risk for decreased acknowledgement, or most at risk, those with decreased speech intelligibility. This is important because those individuals are augmentatively using systems, right? So they may be more reliant on their speech, but if they aren't acknowledged in some capacity, finding that role and that rhythm of how we use it augmentatively to support them can be really, really difficult. And they may not be acknowledged in one form or another. As I mentioned earlier, emergent communication. emergent communication and acknowledgement is huge. It's how we learn and we get that feedback, and we can continue that thought process, and we can continue the language forms. We can continue how we use language, right? Whether it be, I can say, orange juice, be acknowledged. Now I can move on to other things in my environment and referencing other things, or whether it be, I've acknowledged a script and now I can talk about a different pragmatic function in the same activity. We need to feel acknowledged before we can move on. So Gestalt language processors, like the example I just mentioned, they would be at risk if we're not acknowledging their language communication. And that can be ones that have spoken scripts, and that can be ones that have unspoken scripts, or that would be benefiting from using AAC forms. And then those with complex bodies and access difficulties. And we all know that this can be true, right? If you have an eye gaze user and we are not able to acknowledge them, or we are acknowledging, but we're acknowledging the wrong things because of mishits or misactivations, that can be incredibly frustrating. And we can often see device abandonment in those situations. Let me know in the Slack, is there anyone else that you guys are thinking of in your head that you would add to this list for decreased acknowledgement? I mean, really anybody that we work with, if you feel like they're not being acknowledged, I think we could add them to this list. And I'm thinking a lot of those AAC users that we support, when we're not giving them that acknowledgement, and then we see that device abandonment, we're like, well, they just don't like it. Diane said those who appear to be unsocial. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so they get less acknowledgement, and they may need it most of all. Children in general, more passive personalities. Completely agree. Yes, I see that all the time. Yeah, and just again, because we think that they may be not social, there's research that shows that neurodivergent personalities respond to neurodivergent personalities versus neurotypical. And thinking about that, that difference is that maybe we need to shift and pull in other AAC users that may bring them out, may be able to acknowledge peer acknowledgement, right? So many different strategies that we can use within that form of using strategy of acknowledgement. So the rest of today, how can we acknowledge our AAC users? Oh, let's jump back for a second though. Rose, I agree, for visually impaired, yes, they are at risk for decreased acknowledgement, right? Because they may have latency with looking at a device or looking at something in their environment. So we may have moved on. If we've moved on, we've missed that moment for them. Very good point. How can we acknowledge our AAC users? Prior to autonomous communication, and even really when we are autonomously communicating, we still need acknowledgement. But prior to autonomous communication, we can acknowledge by these kind of main strategies: repetition back of a message you think is being conveyed, honor and accepting all forms of communication, adding value to messages and forms of communication, being a good listener and keeping quiet, guilty. I know my SLPs out there are like, yeah. And don't forcing your message. And that's another one. I think as therapists, we can get really hung up on thinking about, what are my targets for today? What do I need to focus on? I'm going to direct that and control that. And we can, again, miss the strategy of acknowledgement when we do that. The first one is that idea of repetition back of a message you think is being conveyed. And it sounds very simple, but if you're a parent or someone who is working with someone who has unconventional or pre-symbolic communication behaviors, that this might be really, really hard. So it's really important whenever communication is exchanged to show value and understanding to that cognitive thought behind it. If you are unsure, it's still really important to attempt to acknowledge. So some phrases you can use would be like, listening. I think you might be saying, or I wonder if you're telling me. And then again, watch their response. The best way to understand their response and their communication modalities is to just become familiar. This is why all these strategies are kind of intertwined. When we repeat, when we're not understood or acknowledged, it can be for many different reasons. And so these are kind of some considerations to keep in the back of your mind as well when you're doing this. Someone might be repeating for clarification. They might be repeating or doing the same behaviors and communication patterns for reassurance or comfort. Until we're acknowledged, we can't move on. For social connection, right? Juice, juice, orange juice, 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 or just emphasis, right? I've had many GLPs repeat a script for emphasis. And so just by reiterating it back to them and acknowledging that, like, yeah, she really gets me. We seek acknowledgement because it reinforces self-image and self-reflection of thought. It says to a person that they have value that others recognize and gives security and social security and that comfort as well as social context. It's so much more than just, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, we're also going to honor and accept all forms of communication. When I hear about this strategy, this is the one I hear about the most, but it's still really hard in practice. So families and users report abandonment because of other forms of communication being easier, faster, and more authentic, right? How many times you can, raise your hand in the audience at home, but raise your hand if you've heard, oh, I just understand them. We don't use the device because I understand what they want or need at home. And it's true. And there's value to knowing that, because that means that they understand their AAC users. When we honor all forms of communication, we build authentic communication connection. And as Lance McLemore says, and I love this quote, he is an amazing AAC user, and he says, you have the right to decide how you communicate, right? So it's not about, as much as I want autonomy and symbolic AAC use and literacy and all of those other amazing things that we know robust AAC offers someone, we also have to understand that we are all multimodal communicators. And so the more that we can acknowledge that form of communication and then also acknowledge using robust AAC and kind of continuing on, the more likely that device ownership and authenticity with robust AAC can kind of happen. And thinking about, and even maybe writing down as a communication team, what is the most efficient way in this situation? And then what is the extension that's needed if that situation isn't in place? For example, yeah, mom and dad understand when their child is hungry, or mom and dad understand when their child is about to have a communication breakdown that's full on losing it. I cannot communicate. I'm past the point of no return. They understand. Will a new teacher in the classroom understand? Okay, let's create some other strategies to talk about, here's what we already understand and here's how we can shape it. Adding value and meaning to forms of communication. So this is critical in the sense, especially for emerging communicators, is that we're going to look at all forms, right? We're going to look at gestures, eye gaze. Where are we looking? What's our body language like? What do the vocalizations look like? And repeat back those messages. This is where we kind of get into that key strategy of repeating back, acknowledging, and then also offering that language model on an AAC system. But also noting that if the message is needed to be timely, and what I mean when I say timely, right? I'm not building an entire sentence because I need to say or self-advocate in that moment right then and there, whether it be ordering off of a menu, whether it be some self-advocacy for body awareness of like, don't touch me, this is my AAC device, don't touch my device. Whatever that may be, you may need some customization for quick access for that individual. So again, working as a team to know what those individual preferences are is crucial. One of my favorites that I am constantly striving for is to be a good listener. And so that means being able to acknowledge and interpret messages and giving them the space they need to create those messages. Oh, it's so hard because you want to join in and you want to socially connect. And as SLPs, we want to talk. But communication partners already naturally take the majority of the conversational turns. We know that from research, and they don't leave space for spontaneous communication. This strategy takes active practice. I always say the magic happens in the silence anyway. If we want quality exchanges, A lot of people will tell you to wait 5 seconds. I'm a big proponent of waiting 10 seconds and also just kind of giving silence at the beginning and seeing what they initiate, what is self-led for them, what is intrinsic importance for them. And that allows us to be a good detective. I'm still taking notes. It doesn't mean that I am not taking qualitative notes. It doesn't mean I'm not taking any kind of quantitative information in my sessions, but it means that I can be a good detective, which allows me to then interpret those messages and potentially model them later on, or just acknowledge on an AAC system. And then another big one is don't force your message. Authentic voice and acknowledgement go hand in hand. This means that not requiring a specific target word to be right is so crucial. It also means that when we think about their leads and interests, those will lead to more spontaneous and authentic communication exchanges. And Lauren Enders, who's actually presenting at the same time, I can't wait to go back and see if there's any new Canva little tips and tricks, but she talks about this in the sense that she's so flexible. Like we're both kind of like that in a nutshell, is like, we'll go with whatever they're doing, right? We don't have to have, this is exactly what we're doing today. And I've got my book and I've got my graft and I'm going to do this in order. I get that there's benefits to that, but so often the magic happens when we completely go off script. And so really trying to be flexible as the communication shifts or changes. It also requires us to not make them repeat messages that were already understood or acknowledged by us. So a big pet peeve of mine, and I'm sure you guys can agree with this, is that we hear this idea of, now say it on your device, or now say it in a sentence, now say it XYZ. That can be incredibly frustrating when we're thinking about the social emotional impact of like, well, you knew what I meant, like you heard me. So in those situations, I'm often coaching people to, instead of saying, say it another way, you can say, oh, I heard you say, and then you model that extension of thought or that expansion. And this goes really nicely with this idea of co-construction. There's a resource at the end here if you want to see more examples of co-construction and the power of co-construction in therapy. Practical AAC, Carol has a great blog discussion and examples there on co-construction. But co-construction can be us starting a sentence and kind of building it together, right? If we're reading, we're going on a bear hunt, we're going on a bear hunt, we're going to catch a big one. We can do ready, set, see what they say. So co-construction can be within a sentence for our analytic language processors. For someone who's a Gestalt language processor, it may be that we're co-constructing an activity where they say one Gestalt and then we model an extension of that Gestalt, right? If they say something like ready, set, go, or to infinity and beyond. Okay, like if I know what that means, and that means that I'm going to go or I'm going to take a turn, then I might model, this is so much fun. I'm going to extend that thought by modeling a comment in that activity. Or now it's my turn, something like that, where we're exchanging and we're co-constructing what that language in communication conversation can look like. Linguists use this term to talk about it in any kind of single syntactic entity developed jointly within a conversation. So I use it, and in the AAC world, I want you to kind of think about co-construction of any conversation that you're happening or any discourse that is built collaboratively between two people. And maybe that's with partner assisted scanning. Maybe that's with going back and forth to create their favorite sensory activity, whatever it is, right? If you're going on a scavenger hunt, or maybe it's with some new communication partner that you're just kind of supporting them from the side. All of those are options. Co-construction, great strategy to go alongside of communication acknowledgement. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I want to dive into when we get it right, like what the power of it using within AAC. So John Halloran, it's one of my favorite videos because there's so much going on and he is such an amazing therapist. But I want you to watch this and see how this is a brand new session with this AAC user. Watch what happens as he explores language. Watch what happens when his communication before his communication is acknowledged, and then watch what happens after.
You see what I got?
It's her name.
You did so good. You want to sit in this chair, maybe?
Yes.
So good.
Yes.
Yes, you said yes.
Eat it, yes.
Yay, you said yes back at me. Are you trying to say eat again?
Eat.
You did it. Yes. I don't know any boys who do any better smiling and giving joy and attention like that. So good.
Eat.
Yes. You get to eat when you say that, and then you look at me and smile. Someone's been working so hard.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No. Look at my head. Watch my head. Say, can you watch me say that? I said, yes. When you tell me to do it, my head will do it. I'm sorry I got you kind of interrupted.
Yes, no.
Yes.
Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no.
Yes, no. Did you see?
Yes, no. Yes, no.
Yes, no.
Yes, no.
Yes, no.
Yes, no.
He's like, this guy, I've got this guy.
Try again. You're so smart. And a good boy.
Yes, no.
Yes. No. I gotta stop you. You're doing too much. And you gotta get that finger ready again, because I've only got two easy. Good job. Let's do the yes by ourselves.
Yes.
Okay, look at me. Yes. Oh, you said more with your hands. Yep, you want to stand up again? Are you getting tired of your knees hurting? Okay, which one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
More.
More. You said more. You're so good.
What did you guys see with John and his exchange? What happened before and what happened after? The connection totally built. Completely agree, Caitlin. Enthusiasm bled over. I love that. Yes, Diane, child changed from imitation to directing the action. He had more control. All of the communication components started to come together, right? He had increased return to the device, more fun and a stress-free natural communication after. Completely agree. That is what builds those neural connections. That is what builds language, right? I always tell people, we think about the best therapy sessions. And when I started as a clinician, I used to think that like, oh, if I just target this word, if I just have these specific contexts, then I can carry it over, kind of how we do in speech and articulation. It's just not how it works. Language has to come from connections that are built neurologically and internally. Has to come from that intrinsic place. And you can see that happening here. You can see, oh, look at this power I have over John, right? This is not something where they've built a connection ahead of time. This is built based in the session. What did you guys notice? Did you notice that he was also acknowledging all forms of communication, right? He was saying more. He was acknowledging more when he said it on the device with the form that he knew. Yep, exactly, Kimberly. He acknowledged all attempts and the child was interested. He held his interest and they began to learn the yes, no. Exactly. That was built organically. I guarantee you, I don't think John's in the audience today, but I guarantee you that John did not go into this session going, I'm going to teach him yes, no. This is not, and this is a completely rabbit hole that we will go down. But yes, no is not a place that you want to start for emergent communicators. And there's many reasons why. So sidebar, if you're like, why, Laura, you can email me and we can have a conversation about that and I can send you some resources. But I guarantee you that John didn't come into this session going, okay, we're going to teach yes, no today. But that's where they went. And he was flexible and he acknowledged it. And the connection built, he learned, he went back to more, he explored, he built off of other semantic words and vocabulary, he built off of pragmatic, he continued the conversation. There's so much power here. Okay. So I'll show you guys this very quick video. This is another great AAC user and her parents. And I want you to see how she's exploring language and then how her parents acknowledge her communication and how they respond.
Dog.
My turn.
Ask my turn.
Your turn.
My.
You almost got it there.
Right.
My turn.
Yeah.
Job.
Good job, Riley.
Say
My turn.
Say your turn.
Not done. Not done. Not done. No.
This program specifically is.
Okay, so the purpose of this video is actually they're just explaining her device in general. But if you watch this video, she explores the device very briefly, and then they acknowledge her. They're not acknowledging on the device. So I know a couple of you guys had commented like, but they're not acknowledging with the device, or the device is, not in place. And that is something that we can continue to shape. And I'm going to share a resource here in a second with you guys to help you shape that with your home and your families and your other staff who maybe haven't quite got that skill down yet. But the most important thing is that she was acknowledged, right? Even when they acknowledged and said might, because she said might, she then kind of shifted that to my turn. And so whether that again be like a motor planning thing or whatnot, I'm not sure, but it continued the conversation. It let her feel security and safety and just kind of expand. She didn't get stuck there because her family was very, very good. Her parents were so great about acknowledging anything that she said. Yes, we could go down the rabbit hole again of my turn versus your turn. That's not the point of this. The point of this is just to say they acknowledged her communication, and you saw her return to them. You saw her give her parents great eye contact. It was just this beautiful exchange, in my opinion. So moving forward, I think that it is incredibly important to have these conversations, as you guys have pointed out, because the devices aren't always present. There's other barriers that we have going on. One thing, though, that we can look to is looking through a checklist of, are we being a good communication partner in this strategy of acknowledgement? So on the website, and there's a full 15-question checklist that you can go to. It could be something that you review as an AAC team in your school. It could be something you review with a family. But these are just a few of the questions that are kind of relayed. And it's a self-guided reflection of, how am I doing, or how is this person doing with acknowledgement? So am I honoring all forms of communication? Am I letting them lead the discussion so the thoughts are their own and not mine? Am I pausing and giving space? Do I feel like I've established that social connection with my AAC user? That goes, these are all kind of intertwined. Am I acknowledging using forms of symbolic AAC versus just spoken words? And do I have ways to acknowledge communication even if I'm not sure what is being relayed? So I would encourage you guys to check out this checklist and use it and take notes and take feedback, because I think it helps you generate the conversation and generate some coaching questions that then could be utilized to kind of move the communication partners forward and help that social emotional impact build for both the communication partners and the AAC users themselves. Okay. This is a really great this idea of capability approach model. Again, it's a little bit of a rabbit hole with only a few minutes left, but definitely check it out. It's from Smith and Padani from just this year. And it talks about how we can shift our support model. And it does have, you can see in here, if you look, it's got just some of these barriers that we might see of gaining access to devices and device use itself, and then all those barriers that Miranda and Buchelman talk about. But over here, it talks about freedom of choice, and the ability to have how you communicate with, whether it be through social context or individual factors. And that goes directly hand in hand with this idea of we're acknowledging that and getting to this over here achieved functioning of what we want to see. So definitely check that out. We still need more research, in my opinion, on the impact or lack thereof of acknowledgement or decreased acknowledgement for AAC and the impact on the users themselves. So I think we still need more tools and resources to help communication partners acknowledge unspoken communication and through forms of AAC, because we know that they are at risk. Here's some of those free resources that I mentioned. There's a great blog from Assistive Wear and Communication Partner Skills, Co-Construction, Every Move Counts, that is a program that is supported from Jay Corson and Terry Foss on how we can look and be better detectives on pre-symbolic communication, how their body's moving, what kind of vocalizations look like, and it's very strategic. So I really like that program. Overall information on acknowledgement. And then this idea, I didn't mention this, I forgot to mention a personal communication dictionary, but this is one of my favorite tools. It was mentioned yesterday by Lily. And so some of you may call it a passport as well, but it's this idea of how are they communicating and how can we acknowledge that? And so if someone isn't familiar, they have access to that dictionary or that passport to show them this is truly important. And then that partner acknowledgement checklist, free resource. All right, I've got about -1 minute for questions, but what questions do you still have? Yes, Michelle. I'm going to put this link in here again. So there is the web page that has both the PDF and the communication partner checklist. It sounds like maybe it's directing you guys to Canva when you click on the PDF. Is that still can't access the slides? Okay. I will make sure you guys have access to the slides as soon as we get done here. Promise. Thank you for bearing with me on my first time in Canva. And Sabina, I just wanted to mention, since you commented there, I'm not sure who told you that you should ignore behaviors to help extinguish those behaviors. I would definitely be a proponent to encourage you to kind of, it sounds like you're already shifting your thoughts on that. And I'm hoping that by acknowledging those behaviors that then you're being more supportive. But yeah. Yes, I promise you guys, I didn't realize there was access issues. So when we jump off, I will make sure that that's all fixed for you. So check again in like 15 minutes. I might even throw on the Slack. Well, no, I probably won't because that'll mess up the next presentation. Okay. All right. If access is the only issue, I am so glad. Thank you guys so much for having me. My contact information is here. You can email me at AAC Innovation. Oh, there's a typo. It's AAC Innovations 01@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram. I share a ton of content as well there. Oh, thanks, Brian. Yes, update the slides link on the session page. That's perfect. I will make sure to get that over to them as well. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. That was wonderful.